Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, all those who are watching. This is Africa Reimagined, the channel. Once again, my name is Kwame Gonza, and today I have a guest, a very important guest, my brother here, Bongani Mokwele from South Africa. My brother here is a development strategist, an infrastructure, financing strategist at the same time. So he focuses on infrastructure, and there is a lot of narrative that has been going. Africa is indebted. A narrative has been going around that Africa is highly indebted to China, and that narrative has mostly been ascending from the Western world, with, of course, with the United States as the leader. It has been saying Africa is highly indebted, and China is taking over. They have been worried. A lot of articles have been written, videos have been, put out there. And actually, my brother Bogani, there is one video which I wanted us to watch before. I mean, we can talk about this. It can give us a little bit of background. That video was published on 26th May, the last month, by The Economist. And it was a look at what they are calling the indebtedness of African countries to China. So I think let me play that video so that it can give us a little bit of it will give us a little bit of background on what we are going to.
China is flexing its muscles as a global superpower, and not just where you might expect it. It's been spending billions of dollars transforming the infrastructure of an entire continent, building ever closer bonds.
Everybody in the equation wins. Zambia wins, China wins.
China has even placed its only overseas military base in Africa.
That gain in influence has alarmed China's rivals.
Our competitors clearly seek to convert soft and hard power investments into political influence, strategic access, and military advantage.
Just how worried should America and its allies be?
Access and military
In the 1960s, Zambians were celebrating independence from the British. It was a time of hope and freedom. To open up trade routes, they had to build a new railway line. It was a monumental infrastructure project, the Tazara Railway, and it was funded by China.
It was the most expensive infrastructure financing project that the Chinese had ever done. It was a boost for China's image and influence on the continent in the perception of developing countries and countries that were coming out of the colonial experience. China was seen as a partner to work with in instances where the West wasn't interested.
Tazara was only the beginning. By 2022, China had helped lay railway lines across the continent, amongst thousands of other urgently needed infrastructure projects. It had roads in Mozambique, hospitals in the Republic of Congo, a dam in Sudan. Than the next 8 overseas lenders combined. But all that investment comes at a price. Much of it is financed by loans. African nations' total borrowing is almost 160 billion US dollars. Angola, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Zambia, and Kenya account for half of that borrowing, though all but a few countries owe something to China, and much of it to state-owned Chinese banks. And there's more than one way to call in a debt.
Africa is a voting bloc of over 50 countries of the United Nations. That is a significant block. And the Chinese have exploited this. They've used this to their advantage as best as possible.
In recent years, African nations have regularly backed China en masse. In 2020, 53 countries issued a statement supporting China's crackdown in Hong Kong. Almost half of them were African. Some believe this diplomatic support is driven by the debt these countries owe China and the supposed control this gives it.
They have lured African countries into what we call debt trap diplomacy. China has extended leases on critical infrastructure like ports and airports.
You have to imagine that if you were a Chinese rival and China was going around the world and getting significant boost to its influence by providing infrastructure, this narrative that China was actually trying to entrap its partners was a very, very attractive one.
It's a view fueled not by facts, but suspicion. The terms of many of China's loans to African nations are shrouded in secrecy.
China doesn't produce reports and documents on how much money is lending, where the money is going. That kind of transparency is not characteristic of the Chinese system.
In the rare cases where researchers have been able to uncover information, it's clear China plays hardball. All revenues from the Entebbe airport in Uganda, for example, are used to pay the Chinese lender who helped build it, before anyone else. Angola is repaying most of its loans by guaranteeing oil. In 2020, 61% of its oil exports went to China. Whilst China has never tried to use its loans to take control of the infrastructure it's built, it is strict about being repaid in full. Some Western institutions, by contrast, tend to be a little more accommodating. There are more conspicuous signs of China's growing power on the continent. In 2017, China established its first overseas military base, in Djibouti. Staffed by over 1,000 personnel, it looks like a direct counter to the presence of America and its allies just a few miles away. And it's looking to expand. US intelligence agencies believe China wants to build a new base on the other side of the continent, in Equatorial Guinea. China has been arming the continent too. From armoured personnel carriers in the Central African Republic to, it appears, drones in Ethiopia. China is selling military equipment to more sub-Saharan African countries than anyone else. China's presence in African civil society also continues to grow. And with that presence comes growing influence. 63% of Africans think that this is positive. In Ghana, less than half do.
My name is Bright Akwe and I'm an artist. And I'm basically having an exhibition on the streets of Accra. I put these posters up about a month ago.
In Ghana, there are claims that China's political influence keeps anti-Chinese news stories out of the spotlight. Bright makes satirical cartoons and displays them where everyone can see.
We selected this particular site because it's a very, very popular space. And so visibility is very, very high.
Bright's story starts in 2016. Back then, there was outrage in Ghana against Chinese migrants who were illegally mining gold, a practice known as galamsey. The mining has severely polluted water supplies, but the Ghanaian government was doing little to stop them.
Currently, look at where I'm standing. The land has been destroyed, Ayamaya, all in the name of gold.
As an artist, I thought, I could use my voice to speak to the issue.
He made this piece.
You see the Ghanaian delegation on their knees and the Chinese president pouring out to them. I put this painting up on my social media channels, and someone from the Chinese embassy saw it, and a press conference was held, and the Chinese diplomats in the press conference tried to impress on the Ghanaian government to literally check the media and check the artworks they claimed was defaming their leaders.
It's not the only example of China exploiting its connections in an attempt to limit criticism. In 2018, a South African journalist had his column taken away after writing about China's treatment of the Uyghurs. A Chinese company had a 20% stake in the publisher he worked for. Its name? Independent Media.
The style of reporting has definitely changed. And a lot of these stories, I don't think they make it to the mass consciousness anymore.
Now, China is making bolder moves on the African media landscape.
Fellow Ghanaians, my name is Papa Star Times. Star Times, enjoy digital life.
Star Times, a Chinese digital TV operator, has an ambitious vision to give millions of Africans access to satellite television, distributing its hardware across the continent.
This deal has been one of the very, very controversial ones, especially regarding how much influence Star Times is going to have with regards to what is seen, what is not seen on our TVs, and how much that goes on to dictate how people largely see the Chinese here. I think it's an issue that borders on our democracy and perhaps even our security as a country.
In just over a decade, Star Times has become one of the leading digital TV operators on the continent, with 27 million online users. Its service carries hundreds of African channels, affording it increasing control of the digital airwaves. While Star Times develops Africa's broadcast infrastructure, another Chinese company is transforming its telecoms, although perhaps not its advertising.
Thanks.
The local people would like to have the base station up and running before the rain.
Seems I've got a deadline and a challenge, but don't worry, we can do it.
Africans have largely welcomed Kwame and its development of the continent's 4G internet network.
As far as China is concerned, what we saw for mining companies, what we saw for construction companies, we're seeing the exact same thing now for tech. Financing undersea cables for digital infrastructure. Transsion has the largest share of any phone manufacturer in Africa. There's the fear that the Chinese might use the construction of the telecom systems to spy on African governments, and as an extension, spy on Western governments that are doing business with African governments. I think that concern is legitimate. But I think in a place where the options aren't as many or as price competitive, I think the Chinese will continue to play a very big role.
The seeds China ago have spread deep roots. Today, Chinese lending may be slowing, but its power and influence over society and politics on the continent will continue to grow. Western concerns are inevitable and understandable, but all too frequently, Western policymakers forget that African leaders and people aren't just bystanders.
This idea that Africans are sort of bamboozled and sort of tricked into accepting a deal that is actually not working for them infantilizes Africans, and somehow they need Westerners to come and defend them from the shifty and tricky Chinese.
Rather than worrying about what China is up to in Africa, perhaps Western governments should spend more of their time thinking about their own relationships on the vast and vital continent.
There has to be a reassessment of how the West sees Africa and Africa's place in the world. Because as far as the Chinese are concerned, they think Africa is going to play an important role in the world and they should be active in Africa. One hopes that the West can adopt the same attitude and not simply pay attention to Africa because it is a target of Chinese influence.
Hi, I'm Gotti Epstein, a journalist at The Economist.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bogani. I hope you saw it and you took some of the information which we wanted to focus on.
Can I establish something? I seem to struggle to hear the video.
The audio, okay.
Yeah, the audio. Was it the same to you?
I was hearing it very well. I don't know why you could not hear
Okay.
it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can.
Okay, I think I can hear you.
Can
Okay,
you
so
hear me clearly yourself?
yeah, I can hear you, but there is something of a noise. But let's move on. If you can hear me clearly, that's fine.
Can you increase the volume a little bit on your phone?
Come again?
Can you try to increase the volume a little bit on your phone? Is that possible?
I think my volume is no, I can hear you. It's just that the
Because I can hear you very well. Myself, I can hear you very well.
no, that's fine. That's okay. That's okay. There is a bit of a noise. I can hear you, but there is something disrupting. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So as you have seen, Jedu Moa also appeared in that video. He was a minister, I think, in one of the governments. It is either Sierra Leone or Liberia, but I think it is Liberia. And right now he's living in Washington. He gave a speech, one speech at the Paulson Institute, and he made a case and said China's presence in Africa. That speech is available on YouTube, on the Paulson Institute's YouTube channel, where he said China in Africa, an African perspective. So he argued in it, and he said that the Africans are not stupid. When you come to Africa, they are looking at the alternatives. What do you have? Um, on the other hand, the West has been coming for a long time, and then China came. So the Africans have decided to choose to work with China. You know, they have decided to favor China. Like you saw, they're saying around 63% of Africans, they favor China, you know, when you take the census. But on the other hand, the West has been saying that we are running into a debt trap. And there is certain cases which have been highlighted. So as an expert on infrastructure financing, I wanted to read your mind, to get the understanding, the deeper understanding of how you as a development expert and an expert on infrastructure financing look at it with regards to what is going on in Africa, that the West is telling us that we should get away from China, and so we should go probably to the West. What is your outlook on this allegation, or rather caution from the West that has been coming to Africa?
No, the reality is the West cannot match the Chinese financing. That is one area of criticality for them. Chinese financing, generally, it comes in the form of state-owned enterprises of China. So basically, Chinese, when they venture in any form of financing funding mechanism with the African countries, it becomes a public-public partnership, as opposed with what we used to, of which the West is used to and is promoting, that is public-private partnership. So the Chinese, let's take the case of Tazara. Tazara was a concession. So you bring in China, the SOE, the state-owned enterprise in China, and it will then be in partnership with the government of Zambia, Tanzania, and all those that are involved within the Tazara configuration. And that is guaranteed through some sovereign bonds. So that's what makes them different. As a result, their rates of borrowing becomes very low relative to the West. So the West is just in a corner, because they're not used to that kind of an atmosphere. So that is one area. So Chinese, they cannot be matched by the West in terms of borrowing, because they come as government. They borrow as government, but what then in return they want the most, let alone the loans that they give, But in what is both, by the way, East and West, Chinese and so forth, when they borrow, they want you to procure all the components from them. That is, be it America, be it Europe, be it China. So basically, you borrow money to build an infrastructure project, but all the components must come from where the money comes from. So that is why then Africa becomes a fertile ground. So Africa is a fertile ground because it gets pushed to export without them thinking of the exportation. That is the African countries. So
Yeah.
basically,
So yeah, thank you very much. So this allegation and this claim that China is by the West, of course, that China is enslaving Africa with debt. Do you find this a legitimate claim? Because you mentioned that the West also comes with all these terms. When you look at financing infrastructure, that when the West says they are going to build an infrastructure like a hospital, there's a hospital which was built in Ghana that I looked at in a recent, from the recent government, which was President John Mahama in Ghana. And that hospital, when the money was given that is going to build the hospital, the company which was brought also was a British company. And that money came from Britain, of course. So the company which was brought to build that hospital, it was a British company. And I was wondering, don't we, do we not have engineers in our countries who can design like this simple hospital? And don't we have like engineers who can build this simple hospital? So with that, my question is, if they are doing the same thing, like what China is doing, like they bring their engineers, they bring their companies to build infrastructure in Africa, and China is doing the same thing, the West is doing the same thing. So do you find this as a legitimate claim or accusation against China, that China is indebting Africa or is exploiting Africa in one way or the other?
now let's zoom in on the development in the African continent during the times of the structural adjustment program of the 80s. If you check in the 80s, we had quite a number of concessions. We had concessions that were running in Mozambique. We had concessions that were running partly in Zimbabwe, PBR. We had concessions that were running up there in Kenya, Ethiopia, and you go on the west. There were quite a number of concessions in the 80s when the structural adjustment program was promoted by both World Bank and IMF. At the time, these African countries were pushed to borrow recklessly for infrastructure-related projects in a fashion of concessions. I mean, most of those concessions, very few succeeded. As a result, many of them remain white elephants, and the country's concerns remain in debt. You know very well, IMF and World Bank, they advocate West. There is no China there. So Zambia, for example, was pushing to debt. I mean, you, the Pan-Africanist, I always ask myself, Nyerere was so smart from Tanzania. How come he didn't see that structural adjustment program was indebting the country, that is Tanzania? A Kenneth Kaunda that we praise in Zambia.
Sorry. Let me just interrupt you, but I think that President Julius Nyerere, I think he was not as sophisticated as you see what Nkrumah was.
No, that's fine.
I think he overestimated.
No, what I'm saying, when you're a head of state, you bring sophistication, you've got the resources. No, it's not his fault, it's time at the time. It was the period where he was operating. I mean, the very same president at the time in Nigeria also couldn't see the structural adjustment program. I mean, even Mugabe himself, Mugabe was
But
very
when you go
smart.
and examine, Nkrumah's writings, it's like he saw these traps. This as a trap. He already saw it when you examine the writings.
No, Nkrumah
Your
didn't
colonel
say
still
it.
assisted
Let's be
him.
frank, Gonza. Let's be frank. Nkrumah, the Volta. What is that term in Ghana? The Volta. What is it? Mention it. You know it.
Yeah, the Volta. This is the Volta Dam, definitely.
The Volta dam.
Akoso.
That dam bankrupted.
Akoso Dam.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving a bit away, but we'll come back. That dam,
Yes.
Nkrumah didn't see, because at the time America was pushing money to him, and he didn't see it. Ultimately, at the end, then he was in debt, because he didn't really calculate that. What I'm saying, generally, all former heads of state in the African continent, the financing formula from the West or East, it really outsmarted them. Okay, let's come back now to, I was just giving a background in terms of concessions. The Western countries, by the way, all imperialists, they prefer to indebt you so that they can control you. So it's deliberate. They attempt to indebt, say, during colonial times, okay, it's something different. And then countries got freedom and they were liberated. The first thing that imperialists will do, once you get liberated, then they plug you into debt so that you can be much manageable. Remember, if they don't plug you into debt, you're gonna have a complete autonomy and independence. So no one is better here. China is in a mission of which China is pushing the Belt Road initiative, of which is exploring the African continent. And basically, the African continent has been dominated by the West. I mean, in the South, you have the Europe, South Africa, partly you have a bit of America there, you've got the French up there on the other side, you've got some Portuguese on the other side, etc., etc. So what I'm saying, the question is the accusation accurate by the West to say China is indebting? It is accurate, exactly what they've been doing. China is doing what they've been doing. Who is at fault here? The one who is at fault here is the sleepiness of the African heads of states, African governments, because they're supposed to. These monies, there's nothing wrong to make borrowings. There's nothing wrong to make borrowings for development. But now these developmental loans, they need to be taken under tight regulatory framework. You need to make borrowings, and then these borrowings, they cannot come and regulate themselves in a sovereign state. Pity what happened in all African countries, most African countries. These borrowings, when they come, they regulate themselves. And I mean, let's take a case in Mozambique, Mozal power plant, smelter plant of the 80s. I mean, that project, they reduce income tax for the project to figures that I've never heard of. That project was importing all components, and they forced government to reduce tariffs for imports to figures that you cannot believe. I mean, that project was finished. This is the project of the 80s, that is Mozal smelter plant. You can come to a country like South Africa, you might think it's sophisticated. We recently plugged in money for the rolling stock for railways, passenger rail and the freight rail. Both of them, same story. They borrow, they bring in the money. Part of the money was coming from China, part of the money was coming from Canada through Bombardier. They make sure we import everything from them, from China. So these guys, they come in and they regulate. So you will have pieces of legislature like local content. But when these laws come in, they disregard such legislative pieces of like or instruments, and they carry on the way they want. So basically, the model is we give you money to build infrastructure, but we're going to build the infrastructure for you. So the example that you made, the hospital, don't you have engineers? These guys, they come in with their EPCs, engineering, procurement, and construction firms. And these EPCs will make estimates, will come up with designs, will run the whole procurement. So we will be forced to procure all major components in China if we made borrowings in China. If we made borrowings in America, we would be procuring in America. If we made borrowings in Europe, we would be procuring in Europe. And this is an old tradition. You remember in the American setup of the Victorian times, when was it? The 100 years of prosperity of America, of what is it, United Kingdom.
Yeah.
It was the same case. Their basis was, we will be the engineering workshop of the globe. So basically the African continent, whatever form of infrastructure that is being developed, it enhances the engineering workshop of where the money comes from.
Yeah. So, so this allegation, what do you think is driven by? The pointing of the finger at China and saying China is the problem. China is a big problem to Africa. Because I was looking at the figures and actually
No,
I saw.
It is competition. They are competing over African countries. So now then the propaganda machine has to come at play. Remember, all of them, the fertile ground for infrastructure development. I mean, in the African continent, infrastructure across all networks. Let's look at energy networks, telecoms networks, water and sanitation networks, transport networks. You see all the networks. So the African continent is a fertile ground. Chinese have lined up for that. The West is lining up for that. So yes, they're supposed to accuse each other. But I'm saying, who is at fault? It's the African people. We are availing ourselves to be a ball in the game.
Okay, so the United States or the West that claim, like you said, is based on competition, that they are trying to compete with the China. I see. The other thing is that ever since they came here to engage, with of course with the exception of South Africa, where they wanted to take over the place and make it a place, for themselves and lodge themselves there, not to go back to Europe. I see that the other African countries, they did not like build much infrastructure. When you're talking about infrastructure financing, that it is rarely that you see that infrastructure was built. Like if you look at the period from 1885 until independence, I see that when we got independence, it is the infrastructure. I will pick out like Uganda and Ghana, that the infrastructure which was built, it was only leading to the mines, for example, taking gold, like for the case of Ghana. In Uganda, they built also a railway which was used to take copper, and they built also one dam which was around 300 megawatts, and it was used for smelting that copper so that they can send it to Britain, as Uganda was a colony to Britain. I see that, even though, from my understanding, I see that even though the Chinese are adopting the same model, but I can see that they have a better deal, and that is why they have been attractive to the African governments compared to the West. That the West has been here for a very long time, but we can barely see the infrastructure which they built, and most of the infrastructure was built after independence. You can see that after independence, you had a lot of African leaders who invested a lot in infrastructure. We talk of people like Nkrumah. When you go to Nigeria, the leaders, they invested a lot of industry, refineries, hospitals, But when you ask where are the infrastructure, for example, which were built during the period of the infrastructure adjustments, you can barely see those infrastructure apart from countries like South Africa. I don't know what is your take on that. That the Chinese, their infrastructure is visible. You can see them. Maybe it is stadium, it is roads. I went to Sierra Leone in 2018, and I saw a road which was built by the Chinese from the capital, uh, going all the way to the town where we were staying. And these guys who were inviting us, they were actually Americans, and they were saying that this road was built by the Chinese, and they are collecting all the road tolls. All the road tolls are going to China until the road has been, completed. And I told them that, but you guys have been here for a very long time. Where are the roads you have built? If you had built any roads here ever since you came here, then there would not be need for Chinese to come here and help us to build the roads. But instead, when you see that there's bad roads in Africa, you bring big cars, jeeps, which can go through the bad roads, off-road trucks. And then when you are finishing your work, you carry those trucks, maybe you sell them or you give them to those you choose, or you carry them and send them back. So what is the problem? Why are you guys so obsessed with China being in Africa? So I wanted to, to read your mind when it comes to that aspect, that for the Chinese, the past 30 years they have been here, their infrastructure is visible, but for the West, for the last 600 years almost, their infrastructure is not visible.
I take it as you're saying I must make a choice between the West and the Chinese. That I'm not going to do. What I would say is, in anyone, come the West, come China, come whoever, they're in the business of business. They're carrying the interest of their countries. They will go wherever, where they put their money in, they will follow their money, and they will make sure that their money carries their interest. These people, they run their own sovereign states. They run their own countries. They've got their own people that they lead, not African people. So whenever they take monies from their fiscus or private firms or from the West, that money must be followed. Now, if this money, when it reaches the African shores, it reaches African countries that doesn't regulate, it's not a fault of the West, it's not a fault of the Chinese. If the money, when it reaches in here, is allowed to do as it wishes, it is not the fault of the lender, it is the fault of the ruler. What is required by the African states is a regulation that regulates. What is required by the African state is to make sure that the regulation makes sure that there is an adequate governance process. I mean, you need to have proper governance here. I mean, I understand there are complications in cases where, for example, you build networks, rail networks, integration-related infrastructure. If you build railways from South Africa to cutting across Zimbabwe, Zambia, and so forth, say, let's take the North-South corridor. You might have issues around regulation there because of these are different countries. But those integration issues can be sorted amongst those countries. For example, countries in the SADC, they should be able to deal with their integration issues. Same in the East, same in the West, and elsewhere, say in the North. So that they've got a uniform regulation when the investment or foreign direct investment come in, it doesn't come in a form that it bullies these countries. The foreign direct investment is not going to create shields for these countries. It's not going to protect them. I mean, it's not. It's impossible. When they lend money, the money must generate as much profit as possible. Even if people die wherever the money is plugged, they want as much profit. African people must understand that. African people must understand that when they borrow, the money they borrow it requires profit where it comes from. And these guys, they make the calculations very well. They will probably say, for example, you check the East, the West. Some they will reduce the rate itself. They will say the borrowing rates is, say what, if the standard rate is 6%, they will say we can give you at 3%. But they know that the whole procurement, and they push the rates on the procurement. So they increase the are you still there, Kwanzaa? Hello? Are you still there?
Yes, I can hear you. I
Yeah,
can
so
hear you.
they
I can
so
hear
they
you.
they 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 they, they score back all the whatever they lost on the actual rates of borrowing on the components. They score all what they lost on the professionals they to build the infrastructure. Your the engineers to design this. Right from the beginning, the transaction advisory services. Transaction advisory services are done from where the money comes from. So basically, ours is to receive the money and makes a political announcement that we've received 30 billion rand from America, 30 billion rand dollars from. That's all. But we must understand these monies, they go out there to the world from wherever they come from, seeking for profit. So the fault is amongst us. The fault basically is within us. We need to regulate. We need to create a stable governance in our institutions. We need to work around issues of integration. We already have this regional economic, what is it? Regional economic.
Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
No, the regional, the SADC,
ECOWAS, okay.
ECOWAS
The
and so
Regional
on.
Economic Units.
Yeah, we do have to. So they must fix the integration issues. Let's come up with some kind of uniformity around legal issues so that contracts cannot be abandoned deliberately. What is your question? What I'm saying, regardless of where the money comes from, it can come from China, it can come from Europe, it can come anywhere. If our house is not in order, it is not the fault of the lender. It
So,
can't be the
so
fault
uh,
of you.
well, yeah, I understand what you are saying, that we have the responsibility, but how are Africans going to deal with this propaganda and brainwashing that is going on? They are telling us that the Chinese are the problem. So I think you have what the claim or the justification is that you have to stay with the West. China is not transparent enough, and to a certain extent, or
No,
to
Kwanzaa,
high
I'm not
level,
going.
to a bigger
I'm not.
extent, a larger extent.
I'm not
Africa has
going.
been treated as infants, like what Jedumua mentioned, that Africa has been treated as infants who are supposed to, everything they're supposed to decide for them what to do. Like the West has continued to have this mentality of looking at Africa as infants or subordinates who are supposed to be taken care of, everything they're supposed to. I think they have continued to carry this colonial mentality and think that they are superior to us. And I see that the world has changed from my view, that this kind of mentality doesn't apply in the 21st century, but they are still hanging on to that belief. And their machinery, their propaganda machinery, is moving in that direction, is continuing to move in that direction. So what do you think, like, as Africans, we
Kwanzaa,
can do, or what can we do to counter that kind of narrative that is telling us that the Chinese are bad, the West is the one good, so you should go with the West?
no, Mr. Kwanzaa, I've said it to you right at the beginning. I'm not going to get to the trap of making choices here. I am saying, regardless of where the money comes from, regardless of whether the money comes from China, whether the money comes from West, what is saleable here is the competitors for the African territory will always compete because we are a territory. We are availing ourselves to the territory. In the very first place, we're supposed to be able to mobilize our own financing. We're supposed to be able to mobilize our own financing. A country like South Africa, for example, a country like South Africa has got the biggest pension fund like PIC. That is the biggest in the African continent. That is recognized elsewhere in the world. I mean that PIC generates a lot of money, and that is pension. Pension is long term. Pension is long term. What? So if you are to build infrastructure of what 30-year concession, PIC can take care of that. But how do we invest from the PIC? PIC invest money on things like real estate, on things like townhouses, on things like gambling. PIC invest on disgraced ventures like Steinhoff. I mean, you hear about Steinhoff in South Africa. They put money in those things, and these are the pensions of government workers. What kind of government is that? And now we're supposed to. So you've got a PIC.
And sorry to interrupt you. What is ironic is that is exactly what other African countries are doing.
Yeah, I'm coming to other countries. You've got this long-term investment that you can use to generate more revenue for it by rebuilding infrastructure, therefore contributing to the fiscus. You've got it. You invest it on all such things that are consumable, and you go and make borrowings be it China, be it in the World Bank. What lunas is that? And you got to say, for example, Morocco. Let's take Morocco. Morocco recently, we've seen they got some money from France. I think France is making inroads there, competing against China. But you look at that, the money that I got from France. It's France says, okay, yeah, the aid, this is aid money, but we'll also give you loans to build the infrastructure. And but our engineers are going to build this. Our contractors are going to build this, and all components are going to be supplied by our Alstom.
It's the same thing which they're accusing China for.
Yeah. What I'm saying, who is at fault? It can't be France. It can't be the France. Is Morocco? It can be. Who's this Bombardier in South Africa, when the rolling stock, all components are procured from Canada and China. It can be. Is the South African government? It goes across. It can be what Mozambique. They also procure some. Namibia. They also procured some rolling stock from China. It can be China who's at fault. It's the Namibian government. Why are you having things like regulation and parliament? Regulation must regulate. That's basically what I'm saying. So the failure of these African countries, all of them, they fail to regulate around areas of financing. So as a result, now they end up falling on a trap of the debt-driven development. Now the debt-driven development, it requires a sophisticated regulation. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you fall on the trap of financialization. Now all the African countries, to a greater extent, are financialized. Because one, remember, our banking system it doesn't originate from us. So our banking system is not very kind with the countries where they operate. I mean, Barclays Bank, Absa, you name them, Standard Bank, all of them, they're not really from us. Now you have a situation where the financial sector is in charge of the economy. That is financialization. So the financial sector is in charge of the economy. That is financialization. Now, when the financial sector is in charge of the economy, the financial sector wants to secure debt, and they push the country to debt.
I see that all over. I see that all over Africa, and even in the West. Recently, around the end of last year, even there was one of the richest guys in Uganda was saying that the economy of the country in Uganda has been dominated by foreign banks, and they were stealing from him actually, and he took them to court, and he won the case, and then all the banks ganged up against him to be able to to wrestle the money from him, and they were able, I don't know what they did to the judges, and they overturned the case which he had won before. So he was making this case, and when you look around, there is only about 1 or 2 banks which are indigenous, and when you go to Ghana, you see that it's the same scenario. When you go to South Africa and all the other African countries, that the economy, all the economies have been dominated by these Western financial institutions, that even to give loans to the people is very difficult. So I don't know, because you said all the responsibility lies with the African governments. I really don't know, as you know me, apart from what I think that we need a revolution on the African continent that would restructure the whole continent institutionally, including, of course, the finances. We see, what we are seeing is that the same systems that are in the West, whereby the economies have been financialized, is the same things which have been, dumped on the other colonial countries, or countries which have been colonized or under the domination of the West. I don't know how we can deal with that power, because on one side, I see that African leaders are conflicted, that they have to serve their people, and on the other side, they have to serve the imperialists, the interests of the imperialists and what they are saying, World Bank and all those institutions. And then when they go to China, for example, you can see the noise that is made as China is enslaving. So you should go back to the World Bank, as we have seen. So how can the African leaders navigate through that complexity, that they have to serve the people and do what is right for Africa? At the same time, there's a lot of pressure coming from the Western world.
Well, before I get to that, just quickly on the infrastructure. One, what is proven about infrastructure is an asset class, meaning which, if it's an asset class, it's got a potential to finance itself. Infrastructure can finance itself through cash flows. So what I'm trying to bring to our attention is, you don't necessarily need huge borrowings to build infrastructure. So what is required the most there is clear projections of wherever, be it if it's railways, clear projections of traffic, if it's energy, clear projections of consumption, if it's water, same. Thereafter, we can make out the calculations and we can predict and say these are the cash flows. Now, once we know that these are the cash flows, now through sovereign bonds, sovereign bonds can provide liquidity in any structure that is supposed to take place of this, that's supposed to carry through this venture. And what I'm trying to bring to attention, building of infrastructure.
Sorry. Can you explain a little bit what a sovereign bond is to the average person? Because a lot of people, they don't know
the guarantees that the state will issue to any form of venture to guarantee that there's going to be payment. What I'm trying to say is, if for example, the state, each and every government is got guarantees. The government will borrow money from China. Let's put an example. Government will borrow money from China, but in return, they will give Chinese government or Chinese company a guarantee that they will pay. Should they don't pay, the China government will call that guarantee. Okay. So it's a guarantee. It's a guarantee that it's a pure guarantee. So what I'm saying, to provide liquidity on the infrastructure structuring or whatever vehicle, the government can issue a guarantee there, and then whatever special purpose vehicle that's supposed to execute the project can take the guarantee and go to the commercial banks for real money, and they will produce the cash flows in terms of traffic and so forth. But all that requires a very tight regulation. So they cannot avail themselves to be bullied by either West or the Chinese. They should just do the sums correctly. And we should do the sums correctly, and then all that must be within the framework of the regulation. All that should be within the framework of the regulation, including financing regulations, all standards and so forth. So basically, I find it very strange where 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 the countries get so much trapped through infrastructure investment projects, like it happened in the 80s, the concessions that collapsed. Because in most instances, when these concessions or whatever public-private partnership, when it collapsed, it means there was something that was not done right. In most cases, say if it's transport, it's traffic, was calculated incorrectly. If it's energy, it means consumption was calculated incorrectly, meaning which the project was reached the financial closure for expedience, not because the project is bankable. So what is required the most here is to have experts that will come up with bankable projects that are apolitical, that are completely apolitical, and these projects will finance themselves. I mean, in the African continent, most of these countries, they've got a lot of people. That is why the West or Chinese like us. They like us for consumption. So if now you're building an energy project, for example, there is consumption there. So this project is going to pay itself over the period of 30 years or so. If it's transportation, people travel here in the country. I mean, if you check Nigeria alone, it's got quite a lot of people. So if you build any transportation infrastructure project there, if you calculated the traffic correctly, that project is going to finance itself. There is not really a need for a country to be so much debt trapped.
So do
So
you uh, are you saying that the African leaders are just incapable, or what you see is are they completely incapable that they cannot comprehend these things, the complexities of these things, or is the power from the West overwhelming that they cannot confront it? What stops them, from your understanding, what stops them from making these decisions? Because I believe many of them, they know these things. I'll give you an example. I normally focus on Uganda because I have a lot of data on it. President Museveni wanted to build an oil refinery in the western part of the country after the discovery of oil, which was confirmed in 2006. And France was, objecting, was against the building of the refinery. Of course, Total, of course, which is Total Energies. And he told them that if the refinery is not built, then there's no taking oil out of the ground. And that is when, after a long time, they were going back and forth on this, because he wanted to build a refinery so that the East African community, which doesn't have any refinery, can take shares into this refinery, and then Total itself will take shares into the refinery, but it will take the majority shares, of course. General Electric was the one, I think, one of the companies which were supposed to build that refinery. But after COVID happened, it looks like he gave in, because he had said that they will not build the East Africa oil pipeline before they build this refinery. And what I see is that it's like he gave in because they were able to sign the East Africa oil pipeline. And I see that he tried to push from his side, that he tried, like the leader tried to push that we should have this type of infrastructure. And the infrastructure, from his understanding, the infrastructure would be able to pay for itself, because he gave an example that why, when they were telling him that the infrastructure will not be, the refinery will not be profitable, he asked him that, he told them that Iran has more than 3 refineries. I think it has 4 refineries, but all of them are running. How can you say that Uganda and the whole East Africa, if we have 1 refinery, which is, I think, around 80,000 to 60,000 to 80,000 barrels per day, that it will not be profitable? So that is when he started going back and forth with Total. So a scenario like this one, of such an infrastructure, that we were not able to achieve it because they are pushing the other side, and there is, of course, interest. What do you think that should be done? Do you still stand by the side to say that African leaders are incompetent, or they cannot comprehend these things, that they are too complicated for them? What is really the core problem?
It's a both of them, man. I mean, let's look at it's a both of them. Let's look at South Africa, for example. I'm sure you saw in the news. I mean, how can a president keep the money under the mattress, man? I mean, million of dollars, you keep it under the mattress. You're the head of state. I mean, that's the case of South Africa. So these are matters of money. You get what I mean? I mean, the South African laws, they've been loosened a long time ago. Like I've said, the regulation is basically the financial sector regulates itself. So, for example, if one takes money from that point to that point in South Africa, I mean, it's not that complex. I mean, the real estate is just useless because the regulation is not tied to the in the real estate. So monies can exchange hands there. I'm talking dirty monies can exchange hands there, as if it's official monies. It goes with insurances and so forth. How can a head of state then have money under the mattress? So you are asking me, Mr. Konza, you are asking me, is it the incompetence of the president? What should be my answer if I'm sitting in South Africa? So I will be saying it's both. There is an element of incompetence and recklessness. The other area that is of concern is they 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 don't allow they don't they don't bring in indigenous advisory services to assist them all the time. They're always advised elsewhere. You see, Tandeka, who's this, the guy from Professor Mkandawire, he once mentioned, he said, all the African countries, post-colonial system, they never be advised by the indigenous people. They always run. They go west or whatever. Kwame
So
Nkrumah was advised mostly.
is this still a problem of colonialism, that our minds are still colonized, like what
No, let me just finish it.
the
Let me
miseducation of
just
the
finish this.
Negro?
No, let me just finish this. What he was saying, he's saying even Kwame Nkrumah was advised in America or in the West. He said all the countries, I mean, here in South Africa, Madiba, when he took over, he was never advised by, even in Beg, he was taking advice to people, some of like about George Soros, and things like that. And he made a point, and he said, strangely, the last country to be liberated in the African continent is South Africa. And he said, South Africa under apartheid, apartheid was never advised by foreign advisors. Apartheid was advised by your Stellenbosch, your University of Pretoria, yeah. And our guys, they don't take advice from indigenous intelligentsia. They don't even think they are black intellectuals in these countries. That is why
So
they
from
always knock
so from
themselves
what
in
you are
the foot.
saying, from if I understand what you are saying, is that now, if the leaders have failed, then the African intelligence and African intelligence and African civil society, then it has to take this responsibility to push itself in front to do the work. Do you see? Is it that the African intelligence has not done enough, or, like I asked in the first instance, we are so overwhelmed by the forces that have the external forces that have interest in Africa? So is it the African civil society that is not taking center stage and taking responsibility, which we are supposed to, so that the leaders now are left in the middle, and then they are pushed, or they are pulled to the other side, where the biggest force now, which is the external forces, pushing them to do the interest of of the external countries, instead of the interests of their people or their continent. So I know I asked a couple of questions there, but do you think that we have not done enough as African intelligence to put ourselves at the center stage of developing the continent and then putting enough pressure on the leaders?
Yeah, within the current affairs of the states or the governments in the African continent, the African intelligentsia is difficult for them to be at the core. They're always kept at the periphery. So what can they do to run parallel things? It's difficult. So it's a matter of the executive the executive of that country to say no, we want original advice from this country, and we need to make sure that we have. So I'm saying the president of Uganda needs to take a conscious decision and say, I want to get the intellectuals from Uganda to give me advice on these matters. In as much
But in many cases, let me just interrupt you there. In many cases, we have found that these leaders have been put there by the external forces, so they have to serve these interests. So they will not agree to take, of course, any advice from the African intelligence, as we have seen, building, even if in countries like Ghana, there's a national development plan which was drawn up by the African, the Ghanaian experts who came up and drew up a plan and took stock of the resources the country which it has, and how much steel is going to be needed in the next 30 years, how much roads. They took stock of all the infrastructure, water, and how we can approach how many industries need to be built. But that national development plan, you can see that it was shelved, put aside. Now they are following this short-term 5-year election stuff, and then taking advice from the World Bank. So how African civil society and intelligentsia for them to navigate this complex issue? I don't know. Maybe you can give a little bit more light on this, but I find it really very difficult. Every turn, everywhere where you turn to find a solution, it looks like this is almost impossible for us to achieve. The development of the continent, the rapid development of the continent. So maybe you can give us a little bit more light on that.
Yeah, civil society organization, they struggle with sustenance, of which the African intelligentsia is just individuals. So let's leave them. But civil society organizations struggle with sustenance, and so whoever pays them for sustenance, they will support his or her agenda. So that's basically what is happening. So as a result, the civil society organization in the African continent are very much unreliable. You don't have reliable civil society organization because it's sustenance. It's a matter of who's paying them. And in most instances, the money comes from West or it comes from China. So if we can have a situation where there are few rands or dollars coming out of the countries in the African continent that can sustain the civil society organization, it will be much better. So the civil society organization will remain pliable to whoever pays them. The African intelligentsia, it's a very tricky setup because they're not organized. The African intelligentsia, it goes about individuals, and even themselves, it's about the individual survivor. So you completely rely on the character of the head of state. Say in Ghana, for example, if you happen to have Kwame Nkrumah, then that is great. Say in South Africa, if you happen to have a Mandela, that is great. And then if once these guys are gone, and the whole thing just collapse. So it's that kind of a situation. It's very tricky. I want to believe that. And I
What
want
can
to.
we do? What
I
can we
want to.
do to move forward?
I want to believe. I want to believe we need to. We need to, regardless of whether it's Pan-Africanist or it's nationalist, but we need to review the systems say, across the countries, or if now is a Pan-African, is a one unity, one Africa. We need to look at the system. You see, look at this thing, how it should be, because all our problems are related to the institutions. Institutions are formed through regulations. So through regulations, government establish institutions. Then institutions manage things. Institutions manage material things, manage monies. Institutions like state-owned enterprises, like you mentioned them, regulatory institutions, etc. They manage material things. Now, issues of agency come in there. Agency, where then conflict of interest. At the bottom, at the far bottom, it becomes corruption. Now, when we pronounce corruption as the father figure of all these things, of which the father figure of these things is regulation. That from regulation, we develop institutions. Then these institutions, because they are not properly regulated, these institutions are inadequately or ineffectively governed. Therefore, then it becomes an opportunity for corruption and rent seeking. Because corruption, when corruption comes, it comes with rent seeking, meaning which now people, they want to profit as much as they can from the coffers of the state. So what I'm saying is there is a need for the rethinking of institutions in the African continent. If from a national perspective, yes. If from an Africa continent perspective, but the national Africa continent perspective is secondary because it's not existing currently. But what I'm saying, there is a need for a real rethinking of our institutions from democracy as an institution too, to look at democracy and really look at it and review it and check what are the requirements of democracy. Is it really appropriate for the current times? Are the institutions
Is that going to be from your understanding, is that going to be or supposed to be an evolutionary or a revolutionary process of reviewing this democracy we are talking about?
I have no idea how it should happen, but the current
Has
state
to
of
be done.
affairs, the current state of affairs is not helping. The current state of
And
affairs.
who has that responsibility? Because you have said that the African heads of state have failed, and therefore, as Africans, we have failed. In a sense, all of us, because the leaders, are a reflection of the society. So we have failed, and so who is supposed to do this? Is this the African civil society or the African intelligentsia who have to come together with the African civil society to make these adjustments or to push through these changes which are very much urgently are required?
Yeah, I already said the civil society is unreliable because it's pliable to whoever put money to them for sustenance.
Then who should we rely to do this
Yeah,
job?
the African intelligentsia are a bunch of cowards in the African continent. It's a bunch of cowards. Now, I have really no idea.
You have
But
condemned the whole continent now because you have
no,
condemned the leader, condemned the African civil society, you have condemned the intelligentsia. So who are we left with now?
no, the most appropriate group is the African intelligentsia, the most appropriate. But they need to develop balls. They have no balls.
Okay. So the African intelligentsia has to push itself up out, in front there, forcefully to put itself or at the center of making things, whether forcefully or negotiating. Is that the sense in which you are thinking about it?
The African intelligentsia must develop balls.
Okay.
That's simple as
Can
that.
you elaborate on that?
They don't have balls currently. Balls. They must have balls. They must have courage. The African intelligentsia doesn't have courage. They also chew themselves up to be puppets
Okay.
because they have no balls. They must.
So is that like the African intelligence? Is that what we could call the bourgeoisie, the African bourgeoisie?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, they're not even bourgeoisie. They just in the periphery.
Mm.
They're just in the periphery,
And that process, how can we? Okay, because I believe that I'm part of that, because we are trying to spark this conversation uh, with the understanding that the times we are living in are not normal times, and therefore something has to be done about this continent. If you look at the events that are, are going on around the world, and how the world is moving, the aggression, things in Ukraine and South China Sea, all these things, Afghanistan. I believe personally, I believe that these things point to something very instrumental that is going on in the world. So, as we, the African intelligentsia, what are the things you think that we should be engaged in to be able to move the continent forward, and even to create that linkage between the African civil society and the leaders themselves who are not functioning, according to the needs of the continent? What are those things that we are supposed to be engaged in to make ourselves functional or relevant on the continent, and to provide a new direction for the continent?
no, the African intelligentsia must develop abilities to imagine the future African continent. We are part of that. We must imagine the future African continent. And we must spend so much time in debating this future African continent. And
But everything starts with talking and debating, and then from there we
yeah, what
can
I'm
get
saying,
what.
we must debate this future. We must imagine this future, and we must debate this future. Then in the process, we'll come up with instruments. For example, a civil society, a transformed civil society is very instrumental. A transformed business organization is very instrumental. A transformed political party is very instrumental. And such configuration, the most appropriate people to come up with such configuration in an effort to transform society is the African intelligentsia. Now, in the process of coming up with these configurations, they must find ways where then they will have some revenue generated for the sustenance of all these things. So if now you have a civil society organization, if you build a civil society organization, you transform it, you take away these people that gives money to this so that it can control them. You have a business organization that does business. I mean, the very critical thing that we didn't talk about here is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Africa Continental Free Trade Area is giving an opportunity for these changes. Now, if the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is going to be providing opportunities for business, that means there is a need to think of business formations within the African continent. And then there is a need to think of political parties that are not the way the current political parties operate, contesting within the space of the neo-colonial ground. And I'm saying the very appropriate grouping to come up with those frameworks or configurations is the African intelligentsia. And it can run that thing country by country while the process for one Africa, one continent is unfolding.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and within that, programs will emerge, like economic related programs and so forth, because this configuration must be at work. They mustn't just be configured, they must be at work. So they must be economic active.
Oh, thank you very much. I like the point you have made, and when you spoke about the African intelligentsia, actually that is the point I very much agree with. Even when you look at the Chinese Revolution, which happened in from 1912 to 1949, it was actually the intelligentsia which came up to mobilize the people, the educated and the middle class people at that time. If you look at people like Mao and Deng Xiaoping, all of them, they came from the middle class, which was relatively educated. People like Deng Xiaoping, they were educated from France. Mao, even though he was educated in China, he himself also came from a middle class, and that is how they were able to change China from the existing aggression that was going on. You can look up, the United States was there, Britain was there, Portugal, Germany, all these countries were there, Japan, they were there, and to a certain extent, I have come to equate Africa, the level at which it is, and its condition to what happened in China. That both of us, we have big land masses, and both of us, we were colonized by these big powers. So I've come to think that the events of our sort of liberation, if you can call it, the final liberation, I think it could be similar to what happened in China. That is what I see. And so when you are talking about the intelligentsia in Africa taking the center stage, I very, very much agree with you in that sense that they must be, the African intelligentsia must be the torch bearers. They must take the burden. They must agree. They must understand. They must appreciate the fact that they are supposed to be the burden bearers of this responsibility. They must bear this responsibility or bear this cross of liberating the continent and starting the process of reconstructing it. Whether politically, like you say, that our democracy has to be reviewed, and economically, our economic systems, financial modes of financing projects, all these things have to be reviewed, and then our social and other aspects. So I totally agree with you in that aspect. And we, myself, the Kwame Nkrumah Theological Institute, and a couple of other Pan-Africanists, we have been working together, and the PLO Lumumba Foundation, we are working with it, that we have developed these petitions, which I'm going to put in the comment section. We developed these petitions, and we are trying to push the African Union and the African heads of state, but we are looking for 1 million signatures for each of these petitions. And one of the petitions is saying that we are demanding for a single African state, a single African government. The second petition is about the demand for a single African currency and a single African passport. And the third petition is about the stoppage of the wars on the continent. So I believe these are the things which the African civil society working together under the leadership of the African intelligentsia can be engaged in. Like I said, I'm going to put these petitions in the comment section so that those people can help us to move these petitions. The petitions have been endorsed by the PLO Lumumba Foundation, Dr. Susan, Pan-African Daily TV, Dr. Edmond Folfak, who is an oncologist, a doctor of cancer, renowned doctor of cancer at Ohio State University Medical Center. And then also our own Joshua Maponga has come in to endorse these petitions. So we are looking for 1 million signatures for each of the petitions, and I've included those petitions in the majority of the videos which I have published on this YouTube channel. And so when you say that the African intelligentsia must be at the center stage, I believe that we have already started the work which is supposed to be done. And we have to focus on Africa, not China or the United States and the West, because all this noise that they are making and claiming that China is the enemy, China is indebting Africa. The last time I was checking the figures, I saw that the United States has a GDP, a debt to GDP ratio, and its debt to GDP percentage is 134%. And China is indebted to China to the tune of $1.08 trillion. But they are not talking about their debt in the United States. They are concentrating on talking about Africa. So that is where I agree with you that this is a propaganda, tactic, disinformation tactic. that is being used, I think, to bamboozle the Africans so that we can lose focus with what is going on around the world. So I want to thank you, my brother Mbogani, for coming to share your thoughts regarding this China and the West, and who, you know, who's a better alternative. Maybe we can put it that way. But the accusations that have been going on from the West pointing at China as an exploiter, as an enslaver of Africa, and what we should also be focusing on as Africans. And maybe if you have a few words, last words, which you want to say before we close in about 2 minutes.
No, thanks, Kwanzaa. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I'm always prepared to give my little contribution where possible. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. And therefore, we are closing for today until next time. The channel is called Africa Reimagined. Go to the comment section and sign those petitions and send those petitions to 2 of your favorite people or your favorite contacts, either WhatsApp or Telegram or anywhere, but just 2, and encourage them to do the same for us, because the continent can only be rescued by us, like what my brother Bongan here said, that we, the Africans, have to do the work. We cannot be claiming that China or the United States is coming to rescue us. We, the Africans, have to do the work. We have to carry the burden of reconstructing, of liberating and reconstructing this continent in its entirety. So sign those petitions, because everything starts with the small actions which we take. So go out there, sign the petitions, and share them with the majority of the people, as many as you can, but the minimum should be 2 of your favorite contacts in your phone. Thank you very much. The channel is called Africa Reimagined, and my name is Kwame. See you next time.